6:30, you want to get going?
Yep, I'm just recording and putting us to YouTube. Let me make sure that comes up and make sure I mute my YouTube so we don't get feedback. Let's see.
6:30. Ron, you want to share your slides?
Okay.
Thing.
All right, we're all set.
Okay.
Great. Let's see.
Okay, I'll just do a short introduction, Ron. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Jean Waterbury, and I'm the Director of Community and Regional Projects at the Tug Hill Commission in Watertown. Thank you for participating in today's webinar on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Our speaker today is Ron Semp, Director of Commercial Sales for Plug-in Stations Online. Ron has worked in this capacity since September 2019. In this role, Ron and his team of sales professionals are responsible for direct stakeholder engagement, promoting electric vehicle charging for commercial, institutional, and municipal end users. He is also responsible for project development, which includes site consultation, proposal development, and sales. Mr. Semp holds a bachelor's degree from SUNY Empire State in business management and economics and is an Association of Energy Engineers certified energy manager. The Tug Hill Commission would like to thank Ron for agreeing to do this session tonight. Thanks, Ron. Please use the chat to ask any questions you have, and we will get to them either during the webinar or at the end. We hope you find this presentation informative. And with that, I will turn it over to Ron to get the webinar started.
Great. Thanks, Gina. I appreciate the intro and the opportunity to speak tonight. Welcome, everybody, to the webinar tonight. Gina introduced me, but I'll reintroduce myself. Again, my name is Ron Semp, Plug-in Stations. Our offices are located in Vallecia, New York, which is about 30 minutes outside of Albany. And we've been working in the electric vehicle charging space for a while now, since 2011. So a little bit about our company before I get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. I just want you guys to know who we are and what we do. Again, we were founded in 2011. I like to say we've been installing electric vehicle chargers before it was cool. And we got our start mainly in the Capital District, and we have expanded since then. Currently, we serve all of the Northeast, basically from Maine down to Maryland, and then we also have some resources down in Florida, working on some projects down there. Basically, what we do is we specialize in the sales and installation of electric vehicle charging equipment and all of the associated infrastructure that goes along with it. So basically, we're not just the supplier. We provide turnkey services. So we can take a project from beginning all the way through its end, from site design and planning through permitting and engineering. We install the electrical infrastructure, as I said, as well as procure and commission the charging stations. So soup to nuts, and we've been doing it that way for a while. We have relationships because we've been doing this for so long and have grown along with the industry. We have relationships with most of the players in the industry, both on the network side of the business as well as the charging hardware. To date, this slide is actually pretty old. I have to update it. We've installed over 1,000 charging ports at this point, across, like I said, mostly the Northeast, with a heavy footprint in New York State. So we've been pretty active, and just in the year that the slide deck has been created here, we've almost doubled the number of ports that we've installed. So we're seeing significant growth in our business, and that sort of mirrors the EV industry in general. Some of the goals for tonight, I'll take you through a quick agenda. Basically, what I'm going to do is talk about who we are, what we do. We talked about that. I'm going to talk about some of the different use cases of EV charging, why it makes sense. We'll talk about some different types of charging that are out there and how that works. We'll talk about some specific projects that we've done for municipal customers. And then we'll talk about rebates, incentives, and funding for these projects. And that should bring us to the end. So a little bit more about plug-in stations. One of the things that I didn't mention before is that we do provide rebate incentive support. That's a really key part of our business and what sets us apart from other electrical contractors that do a little bit of work in the EV charging space, is that we have a lot of experience dealing with program sponsors and rebates. So that's really good or real valuable to our customers who don't necessarily have the bandwidth to take that on. Sorry about the redundant slide there. A little bit about the electric vehicle industry in general. What I'd like to do is sort of make the case that that EV charging and electric vehicles are here to stay, and that the industry in general is seeing hockey stick type growth. You may have seen in the news recently that both Ford and GM have committed to basically doing away with gasoline powered light and medium duty vehicles by the year 2035. Well, it seems like it's pretty far away. We all know that 10 years sometimes passes like a blink. So, that now is the time, the point being now is the time to build the infrastructure to be able to support all of those electric vehicles that are going to be on the market. So with Ford and GM sort of leading the way in the United States, where they're actually chasing some of the European countries, Volvo and Volkswagen have real robust EV charging plans, as well as some of the higher end Audi, Jaguar are all moving towards fully electric vehicles and doing away with their gas models over the next several years. Specifically in New York, excuse me, specifically in New York, we're seeing the EV growth as well. That kind of mirrors the rest of the country, or actually we're sort of ahead of the curve a little bit as compared to some states, with the exception of maybe California. As of right now, I looked at this morning, we have about 63,000 EVs on the road in New York State. A lot of those, I understand the audience here is mostly in rural areas, but so the EV growth is more typically in the urban and suburban areas. But the point I'd like to make with that is that installing the infrastructure helps in a couple of ways. It can having robust EV charging infrastructure in your towns and villages and counties can help attract visitors from those areas and help support your economy in that way. And it's sort of the chicken and the egg situation too. If people have places to charge their vehicles, they might consider, local folks might consider purchasing an electric vehicle the next time they're due to buy a car. So it's certainly a industry that's on the upswing, and it's important that we plan the infrastructure for that. So there's three basic types of EV electric vehicle chargers. The first one is a level 1 charger. Basically, it's a home charger that plugs into the standard wall outlet. That charges vehicles at a very slow rate, and that's only used for home applications. What I'm going to mostly talk about today is level 2 charging, and that's that's run off of a 240 volt circuit, and charges at a rate of about 25 miles of driving range per hour that the vehicle is plugged in. So most plug-in vehicles that are fully electric will take, on a level 2 charger, will take several hours. So between 4 and 8 hours to charge on this level 2 charger. And then there's a level 3 or DC fast charger. These are heavy duty pieces of equipment. I'll highlight one that we installed in Malone later in the presentation. And these are more geared towards almost highway use or emergency use situations. These, like I said, are very heavy duty, expensive pieces of equipment, and they're used to charge vehicles at a very high rate of speed. Getting a car charged, of 200 to 250 miles in about a half an hour or less. So again, those are the 3 types of charging stations. Moving on, so most charging stations in a public scenario or a commercial space are networked. And what does that mean? Basically, it's part of the Internet of Things these days. So everything from your toaster oven to your vehicle will be connected to the internet and be able to be tracked. And charging stations are certainly part of that. And why do we want to network charging stations and make sure that they're connected to the internet? First one is station owners can manage the access to the station. So if the station owner wants only a small defined user group to be able to use that station, perhaps in a workplace situation or a fleet situation, they can do that without creating physical barriers to the station. They can manage the access to the station through the network. One of the more important reasons to make sure that the charging station is networked is that it gives the station owner the ability to collect money for the amount of electricity that was used by the driver. So essentially the station meters the amount of electricity that was used, and that same network then bills that driver for the amount of electricity that was used and reimburse the station owner for that amount of electricity. You can manage your pricing policies through a network. So if you want to change any of your pricing, or you want to create different pricing for different people or user groups, you can do that through the network. The network also gives EV drivers visibility into where the stations are located. If the station is not networked, we're going to rely on EV drivers to physically see the station in order to know where it is and be able to plug in. That's not very practical when you're driving your vehicle. So having a network station, it places that station on a map and gives the driver some visibility and they'll be able to understand where that station is and be able to plug in. The network chargers having the chargers on the network will also give the station owner the ability to analyze the usage, to be able to report that and understand how often and for how long that station is being used. That's important for a couple of reasons. If you have a fleet, you can track your costs that way and be able to understand who and which vehicles are plugging in and when and for how long. And you can also, if they're public stations, you can track to see how often and for how long the stations are being used at what locations, and be able to make a use justification, especially for a municipality, if you have constituents that are curious about whether or not it's a good investment, you'll have the ability to look at that. You could also, when the stations are networked, you can make sure that the stations are being maintained and they're online and they work. And there are some fixes that you could do remotely without even going to the station. And one of the bigger reasons that you want to choose a network charging station is that they qualify for pretty significant rebates and incentives that we'll talk about in a little bit. All right. what we want to do is talk about why should municipalities or your constituents install electric vehicle chargers at their sites. So for municipalities, there's a couple of different use cases that make sense. The first one is for a fleet. So we've seen a lot of municipalities move towards electric vehicles for some of their fleet vehicles. So certainly those fleet vehicles need to be charged, and installing electric vehicle charging can help support that. And that saves operating costs within the cost of fuel. Maintenance on electric vehicles is a lot cheaper than in internal combustion vehicles. So there are several reasons that you might want to consider adding some electric vehicles to your fleet. The other use case is with public parking. So sponsoring public charging stations in your municipal parking lots makes a lot of sense from a PR standpoint. It helps attract visitors to downtown villages and towns. It attracts EV drivers to come and shop in the stores and eat in restaurants and things like that. So, once we're back up and running and we see more traffic in those downtown villages, having electric vehicle charging resources is an important aspect and really helps from a PR standpoint with your business owners. And then there's the environmental benefits. It tells a really nice story about your commitment to environmental sustainability. And that's certainly important for a couple of reasons. Certainly there's some political benefits to that, as well as cost benefits as well. So something that I always talk about when speaking with municipalities is one of the questions is always, what do we do? We don't have any charging stations in our town. If somebody was wanting to install one, what do we do from a zoning and planning standpoint? How do we approve these? What do we need to do? So just some things to consider when coming up with planning for EV chargers, folks who want to install EV chargers in your municipality. Certainly want to consider the future expansion. So that might mean adding additional infrastructure, oversizing projects, things like that. You might want to consider accessibility. If it's a public charging station, is it easily accessible by the public? If it's a public charging station, you want to make sure that it's visible and it's signed properly, so there's no confusion as to who's supposed to park where. Safety and security is important. If you have people parking at night in places, is it signed? Is it secured? What's the impact on the parking space? Is there enough parking for non-electric vehicles, and how would installing an electric vehicle charger impact that? You want to consider the hardware, the quality of the equipment. What are the permit requirements? What are you looking for? Do you need engineer drawings or just a simple site plan? Something that's really emerging right now is ADA access. Is the charging station accessible by someone who is handicapped? What's the electrical capacity of the building? Are the charging stations take an awful lot of power, so we need to make sure that buildings have enough power to support that station. And then there's station protection. We talked about level 2 versus DC fast charging. And then again, is the station protected? Is it going to get knocked over by a snowplow or vandalized, things like that? So those are also considerations as you're planning. People consider how to manage charging stations being installed in your communities. Another use case is workplace charging, and go through the next couple slides here talking about why some end users install charging stations, because you may have some people in your communities asking you, why should I install a charger? Or if you're promoting EV charging, you want to make the best case for that. So why would a workplace or an office or something like that want to install electric vehicle chargers? Basically, it's like any other benefit to their employees. A lot of these projects actually get born out of human resources departments instead of facilities departments. So it's an added benefit. It shows from a marketing standpoint, it shows that the company is new and innovative and forward thinking and really considers the environment and their facilities and what they do. So that's an important thing to a lot of companies. And then a lot of companies also have greenhouse gas emission goals that they want to reduce their carbon footprint. And by installing a charging station, they can certainly help by reducing the amount of carbon their employees use on their commutes. So one of the things, and I know it's an important aspect in the Albany area, and we're seeing it emerging in maybe like the Utica area, where there's a lot more tech-oriented businesses popping up. They're looking to attract talent. They're looking to attract potential employees who are tech-minded, who are innovative and forward-thinking and ahead of the curve. That's sort of that's the type of employees they're looking for. So having electric vehicle charging would tell that story and might attract some of those types of employees. Multifamily is a really important segment of potential customers that we have. If you think about it, a lot of people live in multifamily housing, right? If we expect the EV market to grow as much as we want it to, people need to be able to plug in at home. So there's a real hole here with multifamily housing that, people aren't going to buy electric vehicles if they can't plug it in overnight. So it's really important that we encourage multifamily building owners to install electric vehicle charging, or if there's new site construction and things like that, that those building owners consider adding that infrastructure into their buildings when they're planning them. It's super important. So to a multifamily building owner, what does it do for them? It almost like the employers, it attracts high-value, green-minded residents. It increases their property value, so you can make an ROI calculation on that. And we're going to start seeing some regulations and the government's going to probably put some minimum number of charging ports on new construction coming in the next couple of years. We're seeing that in New York City and some of the other urban areas across the country. And I expect that to spread into more suburban and rural areas as well. And then a big one is commercial. So what do commercial businesses want to do? So when I say commercial, I'm meaning retail, restaurant, breweries, things like that. I'm sure in your communities, you see a lot of those types of places. Why do they want to install EV charging? Basically, it's to attract customers. So why do they want EV drivers as customers? First off, their average income is higher than the standard fuel vehicle owner. The big one, I think, is it increases the amount of time shopping in the store or eating in the restaurant. If an EV driver is plugged in to a charger, they're going to want that vehicle to get topped off and charged fully. So they may stay longer, and the longer people stay in a retail environment, the more money they're going to spend. So it's a real good play for a commercial business to install chargers. And being able to recover the costs of charging, like I explained before, it allows them to have either a neutral or a positive cash flow. So there's very little operating costs or no operating costs when it relates to EV charging. So let's take a pause there. I don't know if there's any questions, and maybe we can answer any if there are.
Ron, the only question that I see in the chat was, what is the cost to a homeowner to install a level 2 electric vehicle charging station? Is there
Yeah, sure. So for a residential charging station, you're probably looking at anywhere between $500 and $1,000 for the station itself, and probably a few $100 for an electrician to come run the plug. So figure $1,500 tops, but probably less than that.
And do you have an annual rough estimate on how much electricity would cost for a year for a homeowner for an electric vehicle?
It's a real difficult question because everybody's driving habits are a lot different. So the cost, there are costs per mile, and I think a good rule of thumb is that an electric vehicle to operate an electric vehicle will cost about a quarter to a third of the cost of a gasoline vehicle. So you're reducing your costs. You get the equivalent of about, depends on what kind of car, but most of them get the equivalent of about a 75 to 100 miles per gallon. So that's an equivalency. But there's so many variables there. It's kind of hard to.
Yeah, it is
hard to nail down.
Okay, I have another question. Let me see. Will a municipality need someone to manage the electric vehicle station?
I always recommend having somebody responsible to kind of monitor the network. It doesn't take a whole heck of a lot of time to manage the station, but there's an initial setup. So figure an hour or so to put into the initial setting up your account and setting your pricing policy and things like that. And then there's just a regular check-in, making sure that your stations are online, that money is being deposited into your account and things like that. So yes, the answer to the question is yes, but it's not a heavy lift at all.
This is an interesting question. What happens if there's a power outage? Is there like a generator that backup, or is the power outage not an issue?
I don't want to say it's not an issue. I'm sure there are people in Texas or EV drivers in Texas right now are
cursing their electric vehicles.
But quite frankly, you can't pump gas in your gas tank without electricity either. So you know, it's an obvious issue, but just like anything else, if there's a storm coming, make sure your tank is full. You can certainly plug your vehicle into a generator if you need to, just like you can plug in your refrigerator. So yes, it's a consideration, but it's the impact isn't that much different than a gasoline vehicle if you were to lose power.
Sounds good. There's a question here. Are there electric boats?
There are.
Really?
So I've seen, they're not cheap. But there are actually, I had a conversation about a year ago with somebody who was considering putting an electric boat in Herkimer to do tour rides on the Mohawk and the Erie Canal, and they were asking about charging for that. I don't know if that ever came to fruition or not, or if it's still in planning, but yes, there are electric boats. Yes, they're extremely expensive, and we're probably going to see more and more of them in the future. So marinas
probably will need to think about charging stations in the future?
They will. Is it an immediate need? Probably not, but certainly if you own a marina, it's something that should be on your radar.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, the next question is, are the outlets standardized for the level 3 chargers? Tesla versus GM versus VW?
Right. So they haven't kind of landed on whether they landed on a standard plug configuration. However, all of the DC fast charging stations will have both plug types in them. So, and any Tesla driver will have an adapter that they can, if they're not charging on a Tesla specific charging station, they'll have an adapter to be able to use the other style of charging ports. So the short answer is that it's not standardized yet. We've narrowed it down to 2, but there's considerations and it's not an issue at this point because there's both types of plugs on all of the DC fast charging stations.
And this is an interesting question from Rich. How do you keep a customer from parking in electric vehicle charging stations spots all day long?
The same way you keep people
Handicap.
from not parking in handicap spots.
Lots of signage.
It's signage and enforcement.
And enforcement.
So whatever, yeah. So, I mean, if you have parking enforcement, writing tickets for people parking in handicap spots, you just add that to their list.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an issue, I think.
Yeah,
all...
it is. It can be an issue. I've seen it be an issue. It's just something to plan on and consider when choosing the EV charging spots or spaces. You want to consider maybe not putting them in the most prime parking areas where everybody parks, and you might want to set them aside just a little bit, so that can be addressed while you're planning for the placement of the stations.
Okay, I've got one more question. Do you know what municipalities are thinking about for tenants who have to park on the street? We are very rural, but have a small riverfront community with no parking on their property. I don't see the town putting charging stations in an historic neighborhood. That came from Michelle.
So, I mean, that's a conversation that multifamily building owners should have with the town. You can certainly lobby the town to put charging stations. The town might be considering putting stations there anyway, or somewhere close by. And if there's enough demand or support for that in the community, it could, I don't want to say force the hand of the municipality to do something, but again, if there's enough support for it and enough people lobby for it, certainly they can do that. Installing stations on sidewalks is something that we've done and we can do, and it's frankly it blends into the landscape if you choose the right station. The same way a parking meter would or a light post would. Just like anything else, you install it. The first month or two, people are going to notice it, and then it just disappears into the landscape.
Okay, I'm going to sneak in one more question. Does the electric vehicle charging station stop running a total when the car is fully charged? And that's from
that's a great question for municipal parking areas. So that's something that we want to avoid, is having a car be fully charged but still parked in that spot and plugged in, so that spot then stops generating revenue, right? So what you can do through that network charging is create a pricing policy that says something like, for example, we're going to charge you 25 cents per kilowatt hour that that you use. And then if you're still plugged in and not charging anymore, we then change the pricing model to time of use. So, basically you charge them 25 cents or 30 cents or 18 cents a kilowatt hour for charging. Then when the car stops charging and they haven't plugged in, they charge something like, let's say $2 an hour. And then you can really, if you want to, you can kind of ratchet that price up. You do $2 for the first hour, $3 for the second hour, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of creative pricing policies that you can implement that solves that issue.
Sounds good. Okay, that's all the questions I have right now. You want to continue with your presentation?
Sure thing. So now we're going to move towards some case studies and some projects that we've recently done. I tried to stick to places that we've worked in the general area that some of the participants are from. So one of the more recent projects that we've done and something that is one of the towns that I love is Lake Placid. I'm a big skier, so that was a fun project for me to do that. So we're doing a lot of work in Lake Placid, both for the municipality itself and to the Olympic Regional Development Authority there. They're doing a lot of work on Mount Van Hovenberg and that facility. So we put in a ton of stations there. But for the village itself, we just installed 2 level 2 dual port chargers. So it's 4 parking spaces. Basically, it's a test scenario for them. They fully intend on installing more of these. Parking is a premium in Lake Placid. So they're really concerned about making sure they're not taking up spaces that would otherwise be used by gas vehicles. So they're kind of dipping their toe in the water. So they installed 2 charging stations in their lot right across from the stadium, and they're a municipal electric supply, so they control all their own electric. So they have resources that can install the infrastructure. So that's what they did. They used their own local guys to install all the electrical work. And you can see in this picture, all the panels and meters and things in the background. They installed that for the charging station. And what we did is we came and we installed the stations for them. We commissioned them and got them up and running. I helped them actually, you brought up that pricing policy. The one I just brought up a minute ago, that was one that we implemented for Lake Placid, because like I said, parking is such a premium. They want to make sure every spot is generating revenue. This project qualified for NYSERDA rebates. So the 2 stations, they were able to get $16,000 back from NYSERDA after the project was done. And that's something that we helped the village with because they didn't really have the resources or know how to navigate that NYSERDA program, which can be a little onerous. So that was a recent project that we did. As you can see, it's that picture was taken just after the installation. There's a bunch of snow on the ground, so it was I think in December or January we put those in. Another project that we just did in the North Country was in Malone. This is where we installed a DC fast charging station. Now this station was sponsored by New York Power Authority. It's a heavy, as you can see, it's a pretty heavy duty piece of equipment. And this charging station charges vehicles at a rate of about 100 to 200 miles for every 15 minutes or so that it's plugged in. So it really hits the car hard and charges that car fast. The reason that NYPA is sponsoring these in conjunction with New York State is to build out this type of fast charging infrastructure along travel corridors. The reason being is we, around the town stuff and in typical driving, most people only drive about 50 miles a day. You can get away with level 2 charging. You charge at home and charge at work and charge while you're out shopping or whatever. And and you have no range anxiety there. You're not worried about ever running out of electricity or running out of battery in your car. But what happens when you need to drive to grandma's? You know, maybe in this case, you know, grandma lives in Ottawa and you're driving from Albany and you cross the border around Malone, you know? So what happens there? I drive, I'm almost out of charge, and the state wanted to sponsor this type of infrastructure, you know, along these travel corridors to make sure that people feel comfortable driving their electric vehicles and they're not going to run out of charge before they've reached their destination. It's a real barrier to EV adoption, is that range anxiety. So it's really important that the government and other sponsors focus on building out this type of fast charging infrastructure, leaving the level 2 infrastructure to more commercial type businesses. So in this case, NYPA sponsored this station. They found a site host in Malone that allowed them to put this station on the site. What we did there, we helped NYPA. We basically took the project from start to finish. So they're pretty intense on the design side. So we worked with one of our engineering partners to do that. And we built that site out from excavation all the way up through station mounting and commissioning. So this is a pretty intense project, and there's I think we won 13 or 14 more similar sites across the state for this year. So it's really exciting for us as a business, and really exciting for the future of electric vehicles in New York. And then a real good use, or a real good case study here for the folks on the call that are county executives or work in counties is Ulster County. If you ever want to look at what attention to electric vehicles can do for a municipality, they're the ones to call. They started a few years back, sort of got ahead of the curve and sponsored 10 to 12 sites across the county to put level 2 chargers in. The reason they did that is they wanted to make sure that their fleet was as fuel efficient as possible. So they began buying light duty vehicles that the county needed for travel throughout the county. They began filtering in some electric vehicles into those. The stations that they install, they're owned and maintained by the county, and they're available to be used by both the public as well as their fleet vehicles. That's also something that can be managed through the software. So if they want to make sure that they have charging ports available for their fleet vehicles, they can make sure that there are certain plugs that are designed for fleet use only, and the public wouldn't be able to use the station without a special code or a card. So it's a real creative design, and it really helped them on a couple of fronts. Certainly, it tells us the environmental stewardship story, which resonates with that area of the state. And being in the Catskills, Woodstock is part of Ulster County and Kingston, a very pretty crunchy area. So politically, it's really was a great story to tell. But ultimately, they did it because it's the right thing to do, and they're reaping financial benefits too by saving money on fuel costs and operating costs for their fleet vehicles. And then moving on, this is the last couple slides here. Rebates and incentives. So one of the best things about installing charging stations right now is the amount of free cash that's available to support these stations. So there's a couple of several avenues that you can take to get these projects funded. The first is through the joint utilities. So the investor-owned utilities in New York. So that's National Grid, NYSEG, Rochester Gas and Electric, Central Hudson, if there's anybody down in the Hudson Valley, and then Con Edison too. Basically, it's great. They're all on the same page. They're all working off out of the same playbook when it comes to their program design. And they're paying basically for up to 100% of the cost of the electrical site work that needs to take place in order to prepare the site for the charging stations. Most level 2 chargers come in at around 90% of the cost being covered by the utility. So that's real money, and it's really helpful to make the financials of these projects make sense. So if you have to make the case to your constituents or leadership or boards, this is a real compelling reason to convince them to move forward with the project now. On top of that, NYSERDA is offering $4,000 per charging port, and that's for level 2, not a DC fast charging, and that's paid directly to the station owner after the project has been completed. So there is a little float period there's a cash flow consideration there, but it's a rebate nonetheless, and that basically covers the cost of the station hardware, right? So if National Grid is paying 90% of the electrical site prep, NYSERDA is paying for the cost of the station. What's that left? So what you're going to be on the hook for is 10% of the electrical costs, and then some of the network charges that are associated with the charging station. So it's a pretty good deal. There's also a NYSERDA program right now for DC fast charging. It's handled differently. There are a handful of companies that are basically vying to own and operate a series of stations across upstate New York. And NYSERDA and these companies are looking for site hosts. So I bring that up. So if you know of anybody that is interested in hosting a DC fast charging station and think that it's a good spot for that, again, along a travel corridor, something like that, there are companies, and we can make the connections that will potentially develop that site and be able to get NYSERDA to pay for some of that. And then, obviously we have a municipal audience, so you're not paying taxes, but for your constituents, there is a 30% federal tax credit. So that tax credit is stacked on top of the utility rebate and NYSERDA rebate, and anything that's left over qualifies for that tax credit. And then anything left over on that, you can get a New York State tax credit of up to $5,000. So at the end of the day, there's very little cash outlay for these stations. And then, the operating costs of the station can be recovered through your pricing policy and how you charge the drivers to use the station. So if none of the use cases I mentioned earlier were compelling at all, this should make it compelling. For those of you who have municipal electric supply, the NYSERDA rebate would still be applicable, but in a lot of cases, the electrical make-ready costs wouldn't be covered, with the exception if let's say National Grid actually owns the lines and power poles and infrastructure, but it's technically not. It's technically managed by the municipal electrical company. We could still probably get some money for that. So there's some nuances there, but in general, New York State's pretty rich right now. So the last thing I'll mention is that now's the time, because of all these rebates and incentives. Now is the time to consider installing EV charging in your communities. This money is not going to be there forever. And the market, as I explained earlier, is only heading in one direction. So whether you install now or install later, EV charging stations are going to be installed. So let's let other people pay for them. So with that, that's the end of my slide deck. So if hopefully there's more questions, I'd love to have an interactive session for the next few minutes.
I think we can unmute anyone that has a comment or a question if you want to raise your hand. But to start this segment of questions off, Ron, this has to do with the Malone charging station that you worked on. The question is from Justin. He asked, how universal is this charging station? Will these stations be universal to Tesla, GM, Ford, and any other? I know we had this question before, but I think he's asking again, is that charging station in Malone a universal charging station?
Yes, so that station is universal. If trying to figure out how to go backwards on my presentation here. Let's see if I can go back a couple slides and I can point out. Can you guys see? Can you guys see this picture? We'll start it. Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see that there's two charging ports that are plugged into the front of that station. The one of those plugs is CCS, and the other one is called a CHAdeMO. So that's getting a little wonky, but that said, that demonstrates those plugs will work with any vehicle manufacturer that can take a DC fast charge. And any Tesla driver will have an adapter. And I believe, don't hold me to it, but I believe NYPA also had us mount an adapter as well, a Tesla adapter there as well, in case for some weird reason that Tesla driver didn't have his or her adapter. So there are some cases, there are some vehicles that don't take a DC fast charging charge. Mine, for instance, I drive a Chevy Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid vehicle. So, which means it takes both gas and an electric charge. Those types of vehicles, for the most part, can accept a DC fast charging plug. However, that range anxiety isn't there because it does have a fuel element to the car, so you can pump gas into it if you need to.
Okay. I've got a comment from Robert Schneider. They have recently installed charging stations, and I'm going to allow him to talk. Oh, Robert.
Yeah, good evening. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hey, Ron. So I am the superintendent at the Municipal Commission of Boonville.
Okay.
We are electric and water company. We recently did 2 installs in our community, and what we decided to do, because we are the power company and we do purchase power at a much reduced cost than most, but we decided to make a project out of it. We involved the schools, and we actually put solar panels up, 300-watt solar panels behind the meter, and we charge 12 hours a day on average of sunlight. And we decided not to charge for usage on our stations. We just decided to try to offset that cost with solar. And you touched on the fact, with Lake Placid and Ulster County, we're kind of a hybrid mix in between the two. I know Kimball Darby and Lake Placid quite well. And Kimball and I had talked about his install that you guys recently did. We've had nothing but great success. But to be honest with you, we are about as rural as it gets. We've got 160 square miles of coverage, but only 2,400 customers. So I believe I have a hybrid vehicle that I run through the municipality. But the big thing that we're seeing are state purchased vehicles, like our bucket trucks. those are actually going to hybrid as well. So as of right now, I believe there's, some of our fleet and only a couple of our residents that are even, using the stations, but, we're starting to see that increase. We've had people this week out charging their vehicles. So, I won't take up much of anyone's time here, but I just wanted to let you know that there are other options. We decided to go solar and, mix a few different projects in one, and it seems to be working quite well for us.
Great.
Thanks, Robert. That's great. I have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Did you incorporate a battery with that solar? What, you say, which side of the meter is that solar panel on? And is that connected to your grid
Yep.
for folks who want to charge their vehicles at night?
So we did a solar system behind the meter, which means we put that energy right back into our system. So it charges during the day, but it is active 24 hours a day. The station is up and running at no cost to our community 24 hours a day.
Great. It's a nice play. We've seen that. We were actually City of Hudson did something similar to that. It's a nice visual, that's for sure. Having a solar canopy on top of a charging station is great. I think you'll find in the future as the station is used more that your solar is not going to really offset the station use, depending on how large that array is.
Absolutely.
But, in a lighter or moderately used station, it provides a really nice visual, tells a really nice story, and helps offset the cost of the electricity.
Yeah, and we located one at our library parking lot, which is in downtown, which would benefit the businesses and, revenue from people charging their station there. And then our second one, we located in the park. So, they're on opposite ends of town. So we've got a little bit of coverage, but yeah, like I say, we seem to have good success with it so far.
Right. Yeah, those are great spots. We do a lot of work in libraries. It seems like their library directors and things seem to be really on board with EV charging. And parks are a great use case as well. People plug in while they're playing tennis or jogging or hiking or whatever they do in parks. So those are really, really great municipal use cases.
Awesome. Thank you for those comments, Robert. I've got a Justin Young with his hand up. He'd like to comment. I'm going to allow Justin to talk. Justin?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you very much. I'm coming from a suburb of Buffalo, New York. I'm a school board trustee on our local school board and also on the zoning board of trustees in our suburban town of Buffalo. We have Tesla in Buffalo, New York, and we have some charging stations in a neighboring suburb that Tesla has put up. My question is, how, as a school board trustee, how do I get this working within our town and within our school district to get this in our community moving forward to have it accessed, because we don't really have that access. And I can tell you, we have friends in our town municipality. It's not a thought in their head. So how do we progress this?
So you really need an internal champion. That's what I've found, especially in municipalities. If you have an energy manager or somebody that oversees sustainability in your town, a lot of small towns don't have that person. A lot of these are driven by mayors. I deal with a lot of small town mayors who present this to town boards. So you really need to be an internal champion for this, and you need to make the case. From logistically, how do we get started? Certainly, you bring somebody like me out to do a site assessment for you. We take a look and see what it'll take to put the charger in, and outline some of the costs and things like that to create a sort of a presentation that you can make to your board or town supervisor. So hopefully that answers your question, but you bring up the Tesla stations, and we do see a lot of Tesla stations out there. Something to bring up, because there's a lot of discussion about universal access and universal plug types. Those Tesla stations that you see at malls, those only serve Tesla charging or Tesla vehicles. So while the stations that I highlighted today are universal and can be used with just about any vehicle, the Tesla stations are proprietary. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Great.
Am I still on?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Still
Yep.
on.
I just have a follow-up question. So as a school board trustee, our school district is unique in the fact that we have a natural gas reservoir that we use as a we use all the energy from it. How would we go about getting we have buses, we have diesel buses, we own the buses. How would we go about, how would you recommend we go about getting our district to transition to electric vehicles in the short term, long term, anything?
Definitely, that would be sort of a medium-term play. Being a board member, that it's all, if something's not written in the budget, good luck. Unless you could bring it off the balance sheet somehow through like a lease program. So, I would certainly start now having these conversations with facilities types. I'm not an expert on the bus side. Or the vehicle side. That frankly, I'm more involved in the charging side of things. But I do know New York State does have some, and NYSERDA does have some programs that will help offset the incremental cost between a standard bus and an electric bus. So if my contact information is on the slide deck, and I'm assuming that that Gene will distribute this after after the meeting. Feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll point you in the right direction.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Just to note, follow up on that, and to note, all participants will be emailed a link to the webinar recording on our YouTube page, and we will be emailing the slide deck to everyone, that all participants. Ron, I've got another question. What are the power requirements to run a level 2 station?
So they vary somewhat, but in general, we're going to need a 40 amp circuit for every charging port. So most of the stations that we install have 2 charging ports on them on the level 2 side. So figure 2 40 amp circuits for each station. And that's at 240 or 208. So we can't run off of a 480 volt service. There are some if getting that amount of power is a challenge, there's some things that we could do through the software to reduce the draw of the stations. But figure 2 40 amp circuits for each charging port, or for each charging station.
Great. I don't have any other questions in the chat. However, Jennifer just posted our link, our YouTube link in the chat for future reference. The only other thing that I wanted to see was Rich Sullivan from the village of Sylvan Beach. Sylvan Beach just put charging stations in the village. I don't know if Rich wanted to just say a couple things about that experience.
Yeah, I
Put you on the spot.
yeah, nah, it's all right. It's all right. The only thing that I can suggest is everything that you've mentioned is on point. When this was presented to us, we actually had to do a return on investment on it, and we looked at it, and essentially we had to come up with the money to get started, but essentially at the end of the investment, we recouped the entire investment. So it was a no-brainer for us to move forward with it.
Great.
That's good to hear, for sure, because sometimes it's not the same. If anybody's been through like an energy efficiency project or any other kind of conservation project that does show a clear ROI, it's a little bit more challenging to make that case with EV charging. So I'm glad you were able to do that successfully.
We were very happy with how the money's worked out on this, and for us, we like to think that we're an environmentally conscious community, and having those stations downtown is not only a draw for some of our tourists, but it makes a statement, we thought. So
Absolutely. I think Sylvan Beach is a destination that you're gonna see some use out of those charging stations. Okay, Ron, with that, I don't have any other questions. I'd like to thank you again for your time and for participants signing in. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you, and we'll call it a day.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ron, and thanks, everyone. What do you think, Jen? Oh, you're muted.
So I think that went great, and I certainly learned a lot.
Yeah.
Good participation, and
Yeah.
sounds exciting.
Okay, I saved the chat so that we have those questions. Okay.
All right, I'm gonna end it all. See you
Bye.
tomorrow.